Hello everyone and welcome back to the Pottery Corner, my studio down on the south coast of England near Chichester. Welcome along everyone. Pottery Top Tips. We've changed the name of Top Tip Tuesdays to Pottery Top Tips because it needed to have pottery in the title. So if you're looking for Top Tip Tuesdays, I'm afraid the name has changed and we're now on Pottery Top Tips. So today's Pottery Top Tip is slip casting. So we've spent some time making the plaster moulds a few videos ago, and I'll put a link up on the screen so that you can find that. There is actually a playlist of making the plaster moulds and how to use the hump moulds. So we've done the video on how to use the hump mould part of a plaster mould. But as you know, my moulds are double-sided, so I have in the other side of the mould the slip casting receptacle, and you can use anything to make a mould. So any item that you may already have around your house, just bear in mind that you have the clay shrinkage. So if you are choosing a particular shape, just remember that it will shrink about sort of 15%, so it's quite a lot if you're making a plaster mould. So I have made some reasonable size plaster mould receptacles from things that are tapered. They don't have to be tapered, they can be straight-sided, but what you can't have is something with a belly on it, because obviously you can't then pull that out. So it has to be straight-sided so that you can lift whatever you have used for your mould out of the mould. So just be careful that you're not using something with a lip on it at the bottom or whatever. You need to be able to pull it out of the mould. And as I say, I've just used plant pots and various things that I've found round and about. And in fact, you can throw your own pieces, so you can actually make completely your own shape on the wheel, let the piece dry out to leather hard, and then use that piece in your mould. So you could actually create something that is uniquely yours. This one, as you can see, is ribbed on the inside, and that makes this little ribbed pot that came out of the kiln a few glaze openings ago. And it's really interesting how the ribs work with the glaze. So I like this little pot, and I've actually made some espresso mugs which are downstairs waiting for the next glaze firing, so it'll be interesting to see how they come out. But quite a nice size for an espresso mug. And I made that from a ribbed glass. So in the pound shop I found a ribbed glass, and I used that to make the mould. But interestingly, I couldn't get it to release probably because of the ribs. So I had to break the glass, which was a little bit of an undertaking. And obviously you need to make sure that you mind your fingers when you're breaking glass. But I did actually have to break the glass out of the mould. So these moulds I have used several times before, and this particular mould makes this particular mug. So you can see what I mean about the shrinkage, because that is obviously very much smaller than the actual mould size itself. So you can see how much you're losing in the shrinkage. But that makes a nice straight-sided mug, which, you know, you can then obviously make multiples all the same, which is quite hard when you're throwing. I mean, those people who are production potters can throw 100 mugs all exactly the same, but for us more amateur people, we find it more difficult to throw things exactly the same. So it's very useful if you're making a set, say you want to make a set of 6 mugs, to use a mould, because then they will all be exactly the same. And then the mould that's downstairs that's drying in the here's one I made earlier bit, makes this mould here. And again, it's a good size mug. You know, these are nice. You can play with the handles on them. These have got obviously Ellen transfers on them. You've seen these before coming out of the kiln. You can also vary the depth of what you're pouring. So if you don't want to have quite such a deep mug, then obviously you can vary what you're pouring into the mould to make the depth of your piece less. So that one has come out of the same mould, but I've just used less slip in the actual casting to make a slightly narrower depth mug. And that again, you know, it's a nice shape. It's a lovely shape, and it's also, this one has like a sort of almost like a built-in foot ring, if you can see that. It's got like a built-in foot ring down here, so that obviously saves your time in putting a foot ring on it. And that is this particular plaster mould. You can just about make out the fact that it's got like a sort of a beveled foot ring in the base. Okay, so I have made a couple of, these are wet, these haven't yet been fired, a couple that I'm waiting for them to just dry a little bit. And I thought I would play with putting coloured slip in the bottom of the moulds to see what would happen. And actually I quite like that, so I've poured a little bit of pink slip into the bottom of the mould, which I'm going to do in a minute to demonstrate, but just so you can see how it comes out. It's actually quite pretty having that double colour on it, and that's all done in the one way of doing the mould. So I'll show you how to do that, and then I've decorated that just with slip dots along the line, and again that one is the same, so you can see. And I've just made some handles, and these are in the process of drying, so I'm just waiting to refine the tops, and then I'll pop the handles on those. So you can have sort of a little bit of a production line going on. Right, without further ado, when you use your plaster moulds for the first time in a day, obviously they're nice and dry. So the casting time is less on your first casting than it would be if you were then going to use that mould again when you'd released the piece from inside, because the plaster is basically sucking out the moisture. So if you are going to be casting during the day in the same mould, just bear in mind that each further time that you use it after the first time, you may have to allow a little bit more time for the cast to take, because the mould will be slightly wet. So I'm going to actually pour these 3 moulds just to show you the process of how it is done. And I have here my little pots of coloured slip, and as you know, I make these little test tiles to show me what colour the slip is, so I know exactly what colour it is that I'm using. So I'm just going to show you how I put the coloured slip on the bottom of the cast. So I have my slip in the pot, I have my mould which is clean, I have wiped it round, and I'm just going to pour perhaps sort of 2 or 3 tablespoons carefully into the base of this mould. I don't want to splatter it up the sides, and I don't want to put too much in because I'm not going to pour it out. Okay, so I've just poured the slip into the bottom of the mould, and then I'm just going to gently bring it up the side of the pot, as you can, I hope you can see. If I turn it very gently, I am then getting a layer of yellow slip around the base of this mug. And I'm trying to sort of keep the line fairly similar. I'm not too worried that it's not a proper straight line. I guess if you really wanted it to be straight, you could put a piece of masking tape inside the mould and then take it away afterwards, but you do have to work quite quickly because you want to be able to keep the slip that's inside that mould viable when you pour. So what I've done is I've just put the yellow slip, as you can see, just poured it into the mould, and I've lined, if you like, I've just spent a little bit of time just running that round so that I have a lining of yellow slip. And then what I'm going to do is use the casting slip. I'll talk about that in a second because I just need to work slightly quickly. So I'm just going to give it a quick stir without adding any air bubbles to it. And then I'm going to pour straight in. So this slip that we've just put in is still very slightly damp. I don't want it to be soaking wet, but I do want it to be damp. So I'm going to pick up the bucket of slip and carefully pour the slip in to the mould right the way up to the top, and so that it is just starting to dome over the top of the mould. Okay, because as the plaster takes the moisture, it's going to shrink just a little bit, so just getting that drip off of there. It's a bit of a messy business running with slip, so try and keep your workstation nice and clean. I use these rubber kitchen spatulas. I find them very, very useful. So the slip has now gone into the mould, and I'm going to use my phone to set a timer rather than trusting myself to look at a clock and think, oh yes, I've got something in a mould. That doesn't happen. I often forget. So I have 20 minutes on my timer, so I'm just going to start that off. So it will notify me when 20 minutes has gone past, and then I'm just going to very gently just tap the mould just in case there are any air bubbles in there, but I'm not doing it very hard. I'm not banging it. I'm just lifting up the edge and very gently just tapping the side of the mould just to see if there are any air bubbles in there, which actually there aren't because I haven't whipped air into the slip. So that can now sit for its 20 minutes, and in that time it will make a wall against the plaster. Okay, so that's what you're doing when you're slip casting basically, is you're making a wall of drier slip around the plaster in the mould, and then after 20 minutes we'll tip the slip back out and then we will leave it to dry. So the slip that I'm using, you can make your own casting slip, but to be perfectly honest, it's much easier to buy it ready-made. So this is, as you can see, pearl white casting slip, and you can get porcelain casting slip and other types of casting slip, but this one I like because the clay body is white, so I haven't put any coloured glaze on there. That's the actual clay body colour with just a transparent glaze over the top, so I quite like the clay body colour. And this is not very expensive to buy. It's no more expensive than a bag of clay, so it's just easier to buy it in its ready-made form. And a bucket this size will make at least 20, if not 25, depending on the size of your moulds. So it's quite economical, it works very well. And then I have another slip bucket, which I use for when we've tipped this back into here. So anything that's still in here will go back into the slip bucket and then I can use it straight away. But all the dry bits around the side that I cut off later, or indeed when I'm finishing, go back into an old slip casting bucket, and then I just reconstitute this, pass it back through a very fine sieve as I would if I was making ordinary slip, and then I reuse it. So there's no waste at all. I'm not throwing away any of this mixture. When it gets dry and a bit gunky, it just goes in the bucket, it's reprocessed, resieved, and then used again. So I keep a separate bucket for the trimmings that come off of anything that I've made. So for the time being, that one is now sitting for its 20 minutes. And I'm just going to very quickly pour these, just so that you can see what I'm doing. And again, I'm going to use a raspberry colour slip this time. So this is raspberry slip, and slip is just clay, liquid clay. So it's clay that you're using as you would normally use for any other thing, sieved so that the grog is taken out. And then I put coloured pigments into my slips so that they are coloured. And there is a video on that, how to use slips and oxides. So again, I'll put a little caption across so that you know which one it is. So this is raspberry slip. I'm just going to pour a tiny bit into the bottom of this ribbed mould. And again, I'm just going to pick it up and work the slip round so it's still liquid against the plaster. It dries really quickly, and I'm just going to make sure that that line is fairly level. As I say, it's homemade, so I'm not, you know, too bothered about the fact that it might not be a completely straight line. And you can see that slip just moving around the inside of the mould, and it's important obviously to turn it to get an even layer right the way around the mould. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that. I'm just giving it a little wiggle because the bit that's just dropped down into the bottom just needs to flatten slightly. So I'm just wiggling it. There we go. Okay, and I'm just going to give that a couple of minutes or a minute to just dry just a little bit before I pour the casting slip in. So that's that one. That's that one. I'm just going to leave that just for a minute because that slip is still quite wet in there. I don't know if you can see. And what I don't want is for the casting slip to hit the wet slip and come up the side further than the line that I have put in there. Right, it's nearly there. Right, so this one I'm just going to pour straight in from the bucket. Again, I don't really need to re-stir it, but I'm just going to make sure that it's ready to pour. If the slip in the bucket gets too thick, which it may well do, over time it will obviously, like any other clay, dry out, and I just add a little bit of water, probably perhaps 5 tablespoons or thereabouts. And what you want to do when you're pouring, as I said earlier, is to pour in one continuous stream. So just start pouring and keep pouring in a continuous stream right the way up the whole of the mould. This is a big mould, this one uses a lot of slip. And again, I'm coming to the top, I'm going to come up and just let that just bulge slightly before it starts sort of falling away, but I do want to make sure that there's enough slip in there so it's come right the way up the mould, so it's almost got like a dome on the top where it's just bulged. Get that out of there. As you can see, it's a bit like double cream. It just sort of goes everywhere, so you do need to be aware that things do get a little bit messy. So I'm going to now pour into this one because that slip has now dried enough for me to pour. And again, just repeating what I'm doing, just making sure that slip is ready to go. Get rid of the spatula. This one obviously is a much smaller mould. Pour in one continuous flow right the way up. That's just bulging on the top. Lovely. That will do. Clean that bucket edge so that it doesn't dry on there. Anything that's getting a bit dry, like that on the spatula, just goes into the other bucket just so that I can reprocess it. So I'm going to tap this one. Just give it a little tap in case there are any air bubbles, which there aren't. And again, This one needs a little bit more of a tap because it's got the ribs on it. I'm almost forcing the slip into the ridges a little bit more because it's shaped. So I am being careful to make sure that I've evenly gone round the mould. Right, there we are. There was actually an air bubble in this one. So I've now got 11 minutes left on my original pour. So these will need another 9 minutes on top once we've poured that one out. So I'm just going to do a quick clear up and we'll pour these out when they're ready. Okay, so the timer is just coming up, ready for us to pour out the slip from the first pouring. So when I set the timer for 20 minutes. And what you're trying to get is a reasonable amount of wall. If the wall is too thin, then they're very difficult and very fragile, obviously, after they come out of the moulds to actually do anything with them. So you are looking for there to be a reasonable wall on your casting, which is why the first time I used the mould, it's 20 minutes. And I'm just going to tilt the camera down so that you can see on this mould. So this is the first one that we poured, and you can see that the clay has dried out. This is the best part. You can see that there's a different colour. So you can see how wide your wall is going to be when that slip comes out of there. So I hope you can see that. This bit all around the edge is really excess, but you can see also how much the slip has shrunk as the plaster has taken the moisture. And that's my timer going. So I'm just going to turn that off, and then I'm going to reset the timer for the other two that are still going. So I'm just going to put that on to 9 minutes. As I say, I find it much easier to set a timer because then I know I'm absolutely right on my timings, because if you leave them for too long, you're going to have a very wide wall, and that's not what you want. So we're now ready to tip this out. So all I'm going to do is get my slip bucket that we were using. So this is the pourable slip, and I'm going to, in one quite quick movement, tip it back out into the bucket, right out and right over. And then I'm going to put a dowel or, you know, something, say you could use your slab guides or whatever, just under the corner of the mould so that it's not lying completely flat, because I want the slip to drain out. So what is happening inside there now is that all of the slip that was not dried by the plaster is now dripping back into the bucket, and that's what I want it to do so that I can reuse it. And I'm just going to leave that for the time it takes for these to go, and then what I will do is move it still upside down onto a receptacle of whatever size. And I'm going to use 2 sticks, because what I don't want to happen is that as this mould, as the cast dries inside the mould, I don't want it to fall out into the jug. So I'm going to use these 2 sticks just to hold the piece inside the mould so it doesn't dry quickly enough that it's going to fall into the jug. But I'm just going to leave that just to drip over the bucket, because then obviously I don't have to clean out another jug that's got slip in it, if that makes sense. But when I need to use this slip bucket again, then I'm going to move this onto the jug. So we'll do that in a moment. Okay, so we've now had several minutes, and I'm just going to lift this mould off of the casting bucket because I want to use that in a moment when I'm doing the others. You can see that the slip has very nicely stayed inside the mould, and that now needs to dry. So as I was saying, because I don't want that to fall out as it dries, I'm just going to use some dowels or sticks actually on the edge of that mould to stop it from drying and falling out. And again, I'm turning it over onto a jug, over a jug or bowl or whatever, and then I'm just going to use a stick just to tilt it very slightly. I don't want it to be completely horizontal, I want it to be slightly tilted. So that will now stay upside down, just to allow the wet slip that's still in there just to use gravity just to pull itself down. So it leaves you with a nice smooth interior. Okay, so that's that one done. There's 2 minutes left on the clock for these, and actually I can already see on this little pot, which obviously doesn't take as long because it is small. So I can already see on this little pot that that wall is quite thick. You can see it. You can actually, if you wiggle the liquid slip, you can see that there is a piece of wall all the way around. So I'm going to tip this one out, move my sticks out the way, and again, one motion over. Again, I'm using the dowels just because this, obviously this mould is smaller, and then I'm going to prop up one corner so that the slip can drip down. Okay, so we'll just let that do that for a minute. We've still got 2 minutes on this particular mould, and I can see that the wall is not quite there, so I am going to give it its full 20 minutes. And if I had used this mould before today, as I said earlier, you'll need to add time, so you'll need to probably add another sort of 4 or 5 minutes, but just keep your eye on it. You'll learn with your own moulds how long it takes. So we're just going to leave that one to keep going. Now, in true Blue Peter style, and Kerin from Australia, what is Blue Peter, she said. So I'll just explain for all you people who live in the States and what have you. Blue Peter is a children's educational programme in England that has been going since I was a child, which is of course on the age of the dinosaurs. So it's been going a long time. And when they do a demonstration, they always have, here's the one I made earlier. So it's kind of like a folklore saying in England that when you're doing something, it's always, here's one I made earlier. So here is one I made earlier. So I poured this earlier this morning, and it's been drying. So it's had this stage of being upside down on the jug, and then it's dried to the point where I can stick it outside in the sunshine. And I hope that you can see it's just starting to pull away from the edge of the plaster, okay? So you can see that that pot is drying in the mould. Now, if you want to use that mould again, then obviously you need to get what's in there out. But be warned, my lovely potters, that's the bit where it all goes a little bit wrong. So this is the important bit. When your item is drying in the mould, it has to be able to tip out. If you're trying to manipulate it out of the mould, you will distort your piece. I'm just going to turn the timer off. So that's the timer for this mould. So if you are waiting and getting a little bit impatient, here is my warning. If you wiggle it out of the mould too soon, your clay will remember and it will go egg-shaped. It will distort your cast. So whilst it is terribly irritating, and sometimes you wait and wait and wait and it's like, oh, my goodness me, are we ever going to get this out of the mould? Trust me, leave it to dry until it tips out of the mould, because if you try and force it, when it goes through the biscuit firing, it distorts. Now, this is a beautiful mug. I spent a lot of time decorating it with ombre underglazes and a stencil, and that will now have to go into my seconds pot because it's distorted. So that's just me being impatient trying to get something out of a mould so that I can do another cast in the same mould. So please bear that in mind. The other thing to say is that if you are using underglazes, or in this case I've used an oxide on the base, do be careful that you check. Here's the other one of those. Well, this one hasn't distorted, but I've managed to rub a little bit of oxide on the inside, which I didn't notice when I fired it. So again, unfortunately for me, that one will have to go in the seconds pot. So, you know, just be aware of what you're doing, but don't try and wiggle them out of the mould. When they are ready, it will literally, in fact, it's just done it. Okay, so I've got my hand underneath and I can just literally lift it out of the mould. They are incredibly fragile when they are in their wet state. So try desperately not to crush them or do anything to them at all until they are leather hard. Now for me, leather hard would be overnight. So I'm not going to do anything to this. I'm not trimming the top. I'm not going to do anything to it at all. In fact, I'm going to treat it almost as if it's going to break in my hand. And I'm just going to put it well out of the way and leave it completely so that there is no chance that that cast is going to distort. Now, that has come out of this mould. You'll have seen that there's some banana yellow slip on the bottom of there. There is a little tiny bit of that banana yellow slip still in the mould, so I just need to wipe out the mould before I use it again. Now, whilst we've been talking, of course, the this mould is ready to go, so I'm just going to take the little mould off of the bucket. So again, you can see that that has all dripped through. And again, I'm just going to make sure that there is one of the slats is actually touching the mould so it doesn't drop through. And I'm going to prop up the edge with a dowel. You end up with all these pieces with dowels everywhere. So I'm just going to move that one off to the side. And again, I'm going to tip this mould straight out. Again, over the bucket. Here we go. Out. I like these big moulds because they fit over the top of the bucket, and then I'm going to prop the side up and just leave that to drain. So that's that. As I say, it's really useful doing casting for multiples of things. So you could do it for bowls, you could obviously do it for mugs, or any sort of thing that has sort of like almost a tapered side. You can have straight sides or tapered sides, but nothing with a belly in it because you won't be able to get it, it won't release from the mould. The moulds are then ready to go again after a quick wipe to make sure that they are clean. And if you're casting with different substances, i.e. different colours of clay or different colours of slip, then you'll need to make sure that you clean your moulds. The other important thing to say is that if you are trimming tops on the moulds or getting bits off the moulds, because they're plaster, you must use wooden tools, because if you use a metal tool on a plaster mould and that gets into your clay, it will explode in the kiln. So that's not a clever thing. So yes, just use wooden tools if you're taking anything off. Say you've got drips or whatever around the top of the mould, then you can just take it off with a wooden tool and pop it back in the sort of gash slip bucket so that you're ready to reprocess. So once you've actually got them to the tipped out of the mould stage, I'm not even going to touch that piece that we've just demoulded until tomorrow. And these that we did yesterday, so these were cast yesterday, they've now firmed up enough and they're not flopping about for me to refine the top by using a scrubby. And again, there's a video on how to do the edges, so have a look at that. And then once I've actually got to that point, I've made some handles and I'll work out which handles need to go on, and then I'll put the handles on, and then they're ready to go downstairs for bisque firing, drying and bisque firing. So a really easy process, casting, quite rewarding, as I say, because you can make sets of things. It's just another way of doing something rather than hand building or coiling or pinching or whatever. It's just another technique. You don't need a lot of equipment for it. If you make your own plaster moulds, then obviously that doesn't cost terribly much. The plaster's quite cheap. And as I say, you know, in the studio, I'm using these as hump moulds on one side and then casting moulds on the other. So I've got a double whammy for my money, if you like, on my moulds. The casting slip is not terribly expensive and is the easiest way to use casting slip. You could make your own, but you would have to add sodium silicate. And to be perfectly frank, don't make your life difficult. Buy a bucket of casting slip. It lasts ages. And you know, it just needs to be revitalized with a few tablespoons of water if it starts to get too thick to pour. So that is your lot today. I wanted to just say that I've had one of my YouTube viewers, Lorraine, came and did a throwing course in the studio on Thursday last week. So that's the first of my YouTube subscribers that I've actually met. So hello, Lorraine. It was great to meet you. We had a good time. It was a little bit frustrating. Throwing is always frustrating. But she's coming back this week to do some trimming, and then in a couple of weeks after that to do the glazing. So she's actually made the pot from start to finish, which I quite like. In the process, my courses, I like to teach people the whole process. It's all very well doing the throwing, but if you then don't do the trimming and the glazing, then you don't know how it got from a lump of clay to a finished article. So have a look on the website for courses. The diary is pretty full, but there are spaces coming up in September, which is not terribly long away. I'm getting myself ready for the Chichester Art Trail, which is on in July 2021, on the 10th and 11th of July and the 17th and 18th of July, when my studio will be open. So if you live near me on the south coast near Chichester, come and have a look, come and have a go, come and have a see what we do here. My work will be for sale, obviously, and you can see the studio and the setup. So it's venue number 110 on the Chichester Art Trail 2021. And then at the end of July into August, we have an exhibition at the Chichester Cathedral in the Bishop's Kitchen. And again, my work, more sort of exhibition work, will be on display in the Bishop's Kitchen. So I'll talk more about that as we get closer to the dates. In the meantime, thank you all for commenting. Your comments mean so much to me. You know, I try to pass on my knowledge and hope that it's useful to you. And then you send me lovely comments saying how nice it is. And I know that Cher has been making some different poppy heads. So looking back on the poppy head, sculptural poppy head tutorial, she's made some sort of fanciful pods and they look amazing. Well done, Cher. I mean, you know, that's what I love about it, is that potters will take an idea, and although they may make the same type of thing, they'll then create something that's uniquely to them. So well done, Cher. That's been really nice to see. And any of you who've done any of the projects that we've covered, either the monoprinting or the sculptural poppy heads, do send me a picture. Either pop it up onto Instagram and tag me. So the title on Instagram is the.pottery.corner, or you can send it via my own website, which is www.thepotterycorner.co.uk. So please do, I love to see what you're doing. My Etsy shop is open and there's lots of items, including some cast mugs, if you want to go and have a look at those. Thanks for watching, everyone. It's great to have you along. Please subscribe and press the bell so you'll be notified of further content. There's new videos coming out every week. In the meantime, take care of yourselves. Enjoy the sunshine if you have sunshine where you are, and I'll see you all on the next one. Bye for now.